Hi, and welcome back to another one of our online lectures here in World History. Today we're going to continue our unit with the earliest humans by looking at the rise of civilizations and really the first civilization that occurred in a place called Mesopotamia. So we've got two constructive response questions we're going to seek to answer through today's information. The first question says, classify the characteristics that make up a civilization. Well, there's five main characteristics, and we're going to look at all five of them, and so that'll be a pretty easy question to answer. The second question says, describe the geography of Mesopotamia. Certainly we're going to look at the Fertile Crescent, the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, and we'll talk a lot about the geography that surrounds that area. So what are we going to learn today specifically? Well, these things will play into our questions. So we're going to talk about how villages grow into cities. And of course, once you have cities and more of them, you can get civilizations. Well, in order to be a civilization, you have to meet the five characteristics that make up a civilization. So we'll talk about what those five characteristics are. And then we will finish by looking at the geography of Mesopotamia and the civilization that occurs there called Sumer. So that is where we're going with all of this today. So kind of break this down a little bit further, we're going to look at how villages grow into cities and what that means for early humans. As I mentioned, we're going to talk about the five characteristics that make up a civilization, and then we're going to look at Mesopotamia, and specifically a civilization in a region called Sumer, or a group of people called the Sumerians that developed there. So that's really the outline of what we're looking at today. So let's set the stage. Number one, we want to really look at this question. This connects back to what we were looking at in the previous lecture, and that is, how did agriculture change life for humans? Well, the easy answer is it radically changed life for early humans, as early humans were hunter-gatherers, they were nomads, they followed their food supply really wherever it was. But agriculture will make them really dependent on the land, and when you're dependent on the land, sometimes you need to stay in one place. So one of the byproducts of agriculture is people began dwelling in larger, more organized communities. You know, they weren't necessarily bustling metropolises yet with thousands of people, but you started having more organization. People doing different things and kind of organizing either your culture or your village around that physically. Of course, cities gradually grew out of this, so a village becomes a city eventually becomes a civilization with multiple cities. Economics began to matter. You start having trade. Now, we don't have any evidence of currency at this point. We're still talking thousands of years ago, but we know people bartered for things. So they traded goats for hay bales, or if they had precious minerals like silver or gold, they would trade that for all sorts of different things. So you would barter or negotiate to trade for what you needed. So as villages grow into cities, we know that farming became easier due to advances in technology and the domestication of animals. We talked about both of those briefly in the last lecture. Technology is when you really use your skills to manipulate the world around you. I think I used the example in the previous lecture of taking a stick and sharpening one end of it to now have a spear that you could use to potentially kill your prey or kill another person in defense if you needed to. Technology can be that simple. Of course, we know domestication of animals could be made to use in all sorts of different aspects of farming. Of course, you get bigger harvests, and all of this resulted from better technology, so you have more food in supply. And this really brings us to this particular fact. The more food that you have in supply, the bigger the population that can be supported. And we live in a world now where we can get food whenever we want it. We just have to go to a fast food place, a convenience store, a grocery store. We stock it in our pantries and in our refrigerators. That's a luxury we have here in a first world country and in the modern world. Thousands and thousands, I would argue millions upon even billions of people have never really had those options in their lives. So you had to work together to grow that food and store that food. But when you're able to have a surplus, that's really what more food and supply means. You're able to do a lot of different things with the people involved, because now hunger is not as much of an issue as it had been for earlier humans. So as cities grew, so did responsibilities. Not everyone farmed anymore. What I mean by that is specialization. And again, we talked about that last lecture. You have people doing other things other than farming. They specialize in a new kind of work. And that's going to be a really big part of this idea of civilization that we're going to talk about here in just a minute. A couple of major inventions come out of this period. The wheel and the sail allowed for trade to occur over longer distances. People weren't building boats yet that could go across oceans or anything yet, but being able to traverse rivers, lakes, and certain seas, maybe the Mediterranean Sea, maybe the Red Sea, certainly the sail would help you do that. As I mentioned, there's no currency yet. We have not found any currency. We're looking at humans around the time of the first civilization here. We know they bartered, but they did not have coins or paper money or anything like that yet. We know that social classes began to emerge. One of the things we'll talk about with just about every group that we see this semester, whether it's the Romans, the Greeks, the Persians, the Egyptians, etc., is they will have defined social classes, meaning there's somebody at the top and usually there's a group at the bottom that are rivaling slaves. Not in all civilizations, but many of them have some type of slavery. So we'll look at how social classes really affect the groups that we are studying. Religion became more organized. We're going to talk about the big five this semester. We'll talk about Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Judaism. We'll look at their origins and specifically how they affected the cultures that they were linked to. But religion comes in many different forms, especially in the time of early humans, and we'll kind of look at that as we progress here. Okay, so how civilization develops. A civilization is a complex culture with 5 characteristics. And really, in order to be considered a civilization, you have to meet these 5 characteristics. Most of these are pretty obvious, and I'm going to give you some examples that go with them to help you further understand each one of these characteristics. So the first one is, you have to be an advanced city. And you might say, Mr. Sagan, what does that really mean? What's an advanced city? Does that mean you have nuclear missiles and lasers and things like that? And obviously the answer is no. So we have to kind of boil it down to its simplest thing. Why do cities exist? They exist for trade. They exist for business to take place. So size alone does not distinguish a city from a village, but to become an advanced city, you must be a center for trade. So think of it that way. I mean, think about the major cities here in Minnesota. Minneapolis, St. Paul, they exist on rivers because rivers are how you conducted a lot of your business. You had people coming in by boat. You also had a very significant logging industry here in Minnesota. Even Elk River, where we are right here, is on a river. It's on the Mississippi, and a lot of people came and did their business here and had access to the shipping lanes and whatever else the water might have been useful for. The second characteristic is specialized workers. Again, we've used that word specialization several times. So you want to have a group of people that does something other than farming. So specialization, again, just a revisit of the word, is a development of skills in a specific kind of work. One of the kind that you see oftentimes in early humans, and we still have this today, are artisans. Artisans are skilled workers who make goods by hand. Obviously, with the manufacturing we have in the modern world, not everything's made by hand anymore. Our vehicles are made on an assembly line, oftentimes by automated robots. We have machines that make all sorts of different things, plastic molds and whatnot.
John Osterkamp, please call extension 2137. 1327. John, call extension 1327, please. Thank you.
I apologize for that. And so we still have artisans in the modern world today. They're just, they're far and few in between. If you're able to go to the Minnesota Renaissance Festival, you see a lot of people there that still continue to make things by hand. But it seems to be, in that case, a little bit more for hobby rather than it is for practical purposes and living day to day. But back at the early humans' time, certainly artisans, anything that would have been made by hand. So people could specialize in making different knives like you see here, or tools, or axes, and they would be considered an artisan. So that's their second one. First one is advanced cities. Second one is specialized workers. Third one is complex institutions. Now, that sounds kind of complex. as the word suggests, but and it still kind of is. When I give you a couple examples, it'll make sense. So an institution is a long-lasting pattern of organization in a community. Some of the ones that we are more familiar with are government. Government organizes us, tells us laws that we should follow. Helps us pass new laws, helps us make things safer, helps us organize police departments and schools and fire departments. So that's definitely a complex institution. Religion can be a complex institution, organize people's beliefs. And of course, the economy, in terms of money and what we do with our finances, can be a complex institution. So if you don't have anything like that, you really can't be considered a civilization. So again, our recap, we start with advanced cities, we moved on to specialized workers, and now we have complex institutions. The fourth one's really easy. You have to have some form of record keeping. So we have to have the invention of writing. So purposes that you would use this for would be tax collecting, of course, making sure tax collecting is fair and equitable, which it hasn't always been in history, of course. Passage of laws, storage of grain, things like that. Around 3000 BC, so roughly 5,000 years ago, Sumerian scribes, these are people in Sumer, and I'm going to show you where Sumer is here just in a minute or so. And scribes are professional record keepers. So these Sumerian scribes invented a writing system called cuneiform. Well, cuneiform is when you took a wedge-shaped point and pressed it into wet clay to make symbols. There's an example on page 21 of the textbook, but you can see an example right here on the screen. Once that dries, you have something that means something. Those could be complex records, and to say, hey, we, collected this much grain this year, so next year we know we're going to need at least this much to live, and our population has grown, so maybe we need more. Maybe it's new laws that were passed. You can use that for all sorts of different things. So our fourth characteristic of a civilization is record keeping. So we got advanced cities, specialized workers, complex institution, record keeping, and the last one is advanced technology. So we know there's technology all over the place. During this time, it might have been ox-drawn plows, a potter's wheel, maybe using bronze. Bronze was a pretty big deal because when you melt copper and tin together, you get bronze. And the reason bronze was a big deal is it was more malleable. You could pound it into different shapes without it becoming brittle and falling apart, and it was very durable. So bronze was a very important discovery that man made and had allowed us to move into the Bronze Age. People being able to use that for their weapons and knives and whatever else you might have needed bronze for. So like I said, it's more durable and malleable. So let's recap here quick. To be a civilization, you have to have advanced cities, being a center of trade. You have to have specialized workers doing something other than farming. You have to have complex institution like a government or religion or an economy. You have to have record keeping, some type of written records. And the last one is you have to have advanced technology. If you meet all five of those, you would be considered a civilization. So we're going to end part one there. When we come back, we're going to look at the first civilization, the Sumerians, which existed in a place called Mesopotamia. So you can go ahead and hit stop and queue up part two.